Welcome to From Betrayal to Breakthrough. I'm Dr. Debi Silber, and today's guest is Antesa Jensen. And Antesa is an American living in Copenhagen who, on the tail end of a 12-year career in finance, came up with a business idea that combines coaching and adventure travel to evoke real-time transformation. Her own transformational journey is the basis of the work she does with her clients, guiding powerhouse trailblazers who have an entrepreneurial spirit to trust and believe in their product enough to actually launch their dream business and be successful doing it. Can you trust after betrayal? Our next guest will be talking all about it. You'll hear about the breakdown before the breakthrough, the dark night of the soul, and so much more. If you've been betrayed, especially by a close family member, you're going to get so much out of this episode. Here we go. Okay, everybody, I have Antesa Jensen here, and I purposely stopped having our little pre-recording chat because I could tell we're going to have such an interesting conversation, and I wanted to capture everything so you can hear it as well. So we're going to be talking about learning how to trust after betrayal. Welcome, Antesa.
Hi.
We're so glad to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. It's such an honor.
Oh, thanks so much. So let's just get started. I mean, betrayal, betrayal could be, I always talk about how it could be a family member, a partner, a friend, a coworker. Let's just start with, if you're comfortable, your betrayal experience.
Whew, yeah, let's just dive right in. Mm-hmm. I guess it's worth prefacing that I had many experiences of betrayal that sort of, there was eventually one that was like the straw that broke the camel's back of my childhood. But I had a very interestingly contested relationship with my mom from when I was quite young. We had a typical divorced family. Parents couldn't talk to one another. My mom was busy trying to raise children, running a business, and, angry at my dad. And so I had a lot of experiences where I didn't really feel like she was an advocate for me as a child. Mm-hmm. And I guess I can jump to the biggest event. So I was a very sick kid. I had really bad asthma, which I developed, of course, when my parents divorced. And there's plenty of things around that. And by the time I was 12, I was getting hospitalized regularly. Mm-hmm. I had a near-death experience. I'd literally had a conversation with God.
Now, is this because of the asthma?
Yeah, I would wake up suffocating in the middle of the night. My mom being a non-supporter of Western medicine in many regards, I wasn't necessarily getting the medical treatment that I probably needed. Mm-hmm. I was instead being sent to, back then, this was in the 80s and early 90s before naturopathic medicine was quite so prominent in society. I was being taken to have my gut examined and random little blood work, allergy stuff. I got put on one of those, a gluten-free diet before they had all the cool gluten-free stuff.
And, I'm just going to stop you here because it's so interesting how often people come on the podcast and they talk about how, let's say they started with Western medicine and how Western medicine failed them. And so that's when they went to Eastern philosophies and alternative practices. Yeah. And here you are saying sort of the opposite, but okay, go ahead.
Well, it's so funny because if you look at me now, the way that I live my life is very much around sort of a more naturopathic, holistic approach. And I have a lot of gratitude and appreciation for that. And I do actually appreciate also the interventionary mm-hmm. Western medicine. Like I needed to be on a steroid inhaler with, regular allergy medicine in order to survive. And I was deathly allergic to cats. And my mom chose to keep cats, even though she knew I was allergic to them. And so I would go to the hospital. And in the ambulance, doctors would say, have you been around something that you're allergic to? And I would say, well, yeah, we've got cats at home. And they'd be like, well, doesn't your mom know that you're allergic to cats? And then I would end up in this middle spot of having to explain to a doctor that my mom has chosen to keep cats while suffocating in the back of an ambulance. And so those were...
Okay, so I have to stop you with that one too. So did your mom know that you were allergic to cats?
She did. So she knew, and she made an active choice to keep cats because her belief was that in keeping the dander in my environment that I would eventually heal that allergy. So that was part of her more unorthodox belief, mm-hmm. was that being around them, that I would get better. And that if I removed them from my environment, that I wouldn't actually heal.
I see.
And then the way that she addressed that was by really, putting a laser sharp focus on my gut, thinking that if I controlled my diet, that my cat allergies would go away. So that was what she believed. That's what she knew to be true at the time. I think that she knows better now, mm-hmm. but that was the information that she had available to her. And she really went gung ho with that. She was, very passionate about that. So I was taking holistic, naturopathic remedies, and I didn't really have any standard Western medical care when I was young. I didn't go to the dentist. I didn't, except for when I went to the hospital, and then I would get drugged up with steroids and antibiotics because I would have mono and walking pneumonia at the same time, and bronchitis and whatever. So
my gosh. Okay. So keep going.
So that was very intense. And I think, I want to really preface this is that I have done a significant amount of healing work with my mom, which is of course the basis of a lot of the work that I do now with adults. And I look back at that, my mom was kind of at her wit's end with a sick kid, and, she had been slighted by Western medicine. And so she was very wary and skeptical of that. And that was guiding a lot of fear in her. She made a lot of fear-based decisions around that I think were governing her choices.
And this sounds very much like you've come to a healing place with all this. But at the time, that to me sounds like I can see where you can feel betrayed.
100%. Yeah. I became a very spiteful person in a lot of ways. Like, I was happy. Like, if you knew me when I was 15, 16 years old, I was a happy kid, but I was also resentful. I was deeply, deeply resentful. And the big betrayal that I want to talk to you about is that eventually my mom decided to take matters into her own hands because my diet wasn't changing. I started sneaking food that she wouldn't let me have at home. I wasn't on board with her ideas about what was needed. That was one of the ways that I was rebellious, because I felt like she was preventing me from having the life that I wanted to have. My experience was that I was being controlled.
Okay.
And so when I was 12, she started taking me to get colonics. And I don't know if you know what colonics are, your listeners know what colonics are, but it's basically a procedure where they stick an apparatus up your anus and they suck the insides of your intestines out. And at 12 years old, that's a lot.
That sure is
a very massive violation of physical boundaries. And I didn't want to go, but at the same time, I had been told that I was sick. I had been told that I had leaky gut. I had been told that I had parasites. I had been told that I had candida. And so the communication I received is that you are dirty and you need to get clean. And that was the way that I was sort of lured into compliance with the experience.
Now, is that your interpretation, or was that said?
It was all but said, I would say. Like, there was a lot of focus around my physical appearance and physical well-being at that age.
And that is so hard. That's a hard age for a young girl anyway, in the best of scenarios.
In the best of scenarios, yeah.
Wow.
So I was sick. I was hospitalized a lot, and I was bloated often as a kid, probably because I wasn't eating well. I mean, we were eating, relatively healthy food at home, but it was like, lots of starch. Like, I ate a lot of bread, even though I shouldn't have been eating bread. And, so anyway, so she took me to go get colonics, and I complied the first time because, if I was dirty, then I wanted to be clean. Like, that was my genuine as a child. And then when it happened again, I actually rebelled. I was in total breakdown. I cried the entire way there. It was being done by a man this time, which felt like a huge violation for me.
Yeah.
In his basement of his house. Like, it was just like I didn't know him. And my mom basically gave consent on my behalf. And by the time I got to the place where this happened, I had completely shut off. I mean, like, I knew that there was no fighting. There was no, like, I couldn't jump out of a moving vehicle. I couldn't run away. This was my mother. She was an authority figure. I had to obey. And so I had this colonic, and I remember, like, this is sort of graphic, but I remember him having to use extra lube to get the apparatus in. And I remember, him trying to make light of the situation by saying that, the bowel movement television would soon be showing us what was on my insides. And I felt like the truth was sort of involuntarily being sucked out of me in a way. And my mom would sort of use the machine where you could see what was coming out of you as a lie detector for me. So if I told her I didn't have chocolate at lunch and then chocolate came floating by, she'd look at me as though I had betrayed her.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And so, as you can imagine, so I'm sure you know about this a lot. One of the things that I've studied a lot is the freeze defense mechanism, which is very relevant for people who struggle with betrayal, because there's no escape and there's no fighting back. And so your body just shuts down. And that's what happened for me. I kind of decided that day that this was not a woman that I could trust. Nothing about it. And so I shut down, and we've talked about it since, and she knows that I shut down, but she didn't understand why, of course. And
what did shutting down look like and mean for you?
I didn't tell her anything. So in the following years, I had just recently, when this happened, I just had a near-death experience where I had a conversation with God. I didn't talk to anyone about that. I had developed lockjaw, which I had for a year, and I didn't tell anyone. And then I got my period in the hospital, didn't tell anybody. Like, when I was like in, I think, 9th grade, I was a late bloomer, and I got my period, and I withheld everything. Like, I didn't want anyone to know what my truth was, because I felt like it had been prematurely taken away from me against my will.
And think of what lockjaw is. It's like a refusal to speak.
Yes, totally. I mean, I'm 100%, like, I do body work with a lot of my clients, and that's when people have thyroid issues, when people have throat issues, when people have lockjaw, like that is a belief that you can't speak your truth.
Right.
Like,
oh, that's amazing. So
super relevant. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So now the body cannot handle this kind of stress. So did you have any other symptoms, physical symptoms at the time, or was it just mostly mental, emotional?
I regularly lost my voice. That happened to me often. And I'm a singer, actually. So I have a background in music. I was on my way to being a professional musician until I was about 19 years old. And I sang and played the French horn. And my illnesses often resulted in me losing my voice. And then one of the things that happened after that event, because the colonics became a form of punishment. Like, I could no longer be spanked. I was too old to get spanked. And so when I went through my natural teenage phase of wanting to sort of establish my own sovereignty, my mom would punish me by sending me to the colonics if I was out of alignment. That was her language. She'd say, "You're out of alignment. We better set up at a colonic. There must be something going on in your gut. There must be something rotting in your gut."
Right.
And in the event that wasn't available, or prior to that, I had a choice to administer myself enemas. So from when I was about 13, I was doing enemas regularly and taking senna leaf, which is an herbal laxative. I didn't know that was a form of purging, and I didn't know what purging was until I was in college and started taking psychology classes, as you probably know. But so I basically, for the course of the next about 14 years or so, I was using purging methods and control methods to manage my weight, to stay in alignment. It was almost like I wanted to take my power back, and that was how I did it.
Right.
By controlling that. And then the relationship that I developed with my mom during that time was one of reporting my compliance. And so I would tell her how good I've eaten, and I would tell her how much I weighed. And one of the ways she greeted me until probably into my late 20s is she would tell me that I looked edemic. She'd tell me, like, I looked like I was retaining water, that I looked puffy, before even really saying, "Hi, how are you?" And I eventually addressed that with her, but that was heartbreaking for me, is that, I felt like I was objectified. I felt objectified.
Right.
And I've developed I was a very high performer, high achiever, did things really well. I effectively decided that the only way to stay safe was to be 100% independent. It was, I would say, for me now, is what I know now of sovereignty. This is not sovereignty, but it's what I considered sovereignty, was that I decided that I no longer had needs. And my relationships, my friendships, the people around me, I would develop these connections with people where I was the one handling everyone else's needs. And I never, ever even questioned what my own needs were. That was not a conversation that happened inside of my head.
And this is something I hear every single day from so many women. We're conditioned to put ourselves last. And here you can see how just your own needs, and you just weren't even a consideration. So I'm sure that impacted the types of relationships you had too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well into my early 30s, to be honest. We were briefly talking about my ex-boyfriend. Like that was a relationship where it just didn't occur to me that I had needs. And, I approached our quarrels as sort of diplomatic office disagreements, like it wasn't, there were no emotions. I didn't think that there was space for my emotional experience until I was probably 33 years old.
So what made the change for you? What happened?
Well, spiritually speaking, I would say that I started going through an awakening. I had one of the things that sort of birthed from this independence was I was a very big traveler. And I've been to 40 countries. I've traveled the world. I've spent a lot of time with indigenous cultures. I'm very interested in community and connection. I've always been very drawn to that. And I was in South America and, nothing went according to plan. And I had a complete breakdown one day where we got abandoned in the middle of nowhere, my friend and I, in southern Peru. And by the time we got to the bus station, it was this huge dramatic event of like, I literally thought I was going to get killed by this taxi driver and dismembered. My mind was in a really intense space. And we got to this bus station and the bus that we were supposed to take next got canceled. And I just lost it. And I didn't recognize myself because I had never seen that part of me because I was on such lockdown. I got very angry at this innocent bus station attendant about the bus being canceled. And, I was that white crazy woman in the bus station in the middle of Peru. It just was like on a complete meltdown. And I started developing health issues. So I developed, at this point, I had actually gotten so much control of my health through control. Through my diet.
I'm just going to say this sounds to me, and you haven't even shared the rest of it. This sounds like the breakdown before the breakthrough, right? That's what I'm hearing right here.
100%. This is it. So I got home from that trip. I had developed overnight IBS. I lost my voice once again, and I started feeling very emotionally volatile to the degree at which I did not have tools to control it.
Well, and here it is. It's years of just keeping all of this in. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had lots of backlog. I had been in complete shutdown and my body was like, no more. I can't do this anymore. And you know this just as well as I do. I see this with my clients all the time and their bodies respond. And that's when they start to actually go look for help because you can't ignore it when it becomes physical.
And this is what I see too. And I've seen this for years where when you allow for those emotions, you react volatilely, or even something like I'll tell people when I used to work with emotional leaders all the time, don't be afraid if all of a sudden you start having crazy dreams. Yeah. Because this is everything that you've been suppressing is 100%. Is coming up and coming out. And that's a good thing. You just need to learn how to manage it effectively. So go ahead.
Yeah, so that's another thing that happened is I developed anxiety and started having panic attacks almost every night. So I wasn't getting, and this was not, all of this was in direct conflict with who I knew myself to be. So there was a whole identity and existential crisis happening. Like I didn't understand the experience I was having and couldn't relate to it. And I judged it, of course. I think this happens with people who have depression and who have anxiety is their view of themselves is not depressed and is not anxious. And so they don't understand why they're having this experience. And while that's happening, they're in judgment of it. And that's why it doesn't go away. You can't heal something if you're judging it.
Absolutely. And this also sounds like, I talk about death and rebirth, and it sounds like it is the death of the old and the rebirth hasn't happened yet, and that's a terrifying space because the old you no longer makes sense, but a new you, it hasn't been birthed yet.
Hasn't arrived yet, Yeah, they, in spiritual terms, they call it the dark night of the soul. And mine lasted for about 2 years.
Wow.
I went to doctors in Copenhagen. I got colonoscopies. I considered taking anti-anxiety medicine, but something about that didn't really feel true for me. I knew that there was something happening and I had no idea where to look. Like I just, until you're in this world, you don't really know where to start actually. And I really resonate with that because I was so confused. So what I did is I figured maybe if I just traveled more, I would figure it out. So it's like, I think I had at any given point about 3 or 4 international plane tickets in my possession at any given time. And then I met someone who I was really attracted to, and he was a coach, and he was in a community of people who had interpersonal relating skills that I did not know existed. And I found myself starting to go really crazy in that relationship. And I was just like, there's something here that I don't know. Like I've never learned this stuff. I feel confused. And I had started meditating, and in the meditation process, things actually started to get worse. Mm-hmm. I was, the words that I used then, this was sort of in the middle of this dark night of the soul period. I used this reference that I felt like I was blindfolded on a roller coaster at nighttime. I was so disoriented. I had no idea who I was.
Right.
And at this point, I also knew that I didn't want to be at my job anymore. I knew that but I had no idea what I would do. Like I was so far veered off of my path, but I didn't know where my path was. I didn't know to go left or right or up or down or.
And I want to stop you here now, because this is such an important place and such an important space, because here's the point where, and I saw this in my study, the women who medicated, who avoided, who numbed and distracted, they didn't heal.
Right.
But when you face it, you feel it. That's the only way you start to heal. And it sounds like you're navigating through this path of, I don't want to numb, distract, avoid. I'm feeling this deeply, and I'm trying to figure it out. So, and that's the only way you can get to healing, but it is a terrifying space.
Totally. Mm-hmm. This is the thing that I work with my clients on the most, because we don't want to hurt. Like it is painful to heal. It is, I say this, like I use the reference because I have a background in weightlifting. In order to build muscle, you have to rip muscle, and you're going to get sore. You're not going to be able to walk for a couple of weeks, like those are really real. The body is a tangible experience of what's happening intangibly, inside of ourselves when we're healing our heart. Like it hurts. And the only way out is through. You have to feel it.
That's it. And you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And I think something so simple as being uncomfortable, people just don't want to go there. But it's only in those waters do you start making sense and meaning out of your experience.
Right. And incidentally, the suffering is worse when you try to pull away from it. Like there's this amazing video, which you may want to put in your show notes just for humor purposes. There's this video of this little boy who's hanging onto a rope in the water, and he's kicking and screaming, and he thinks that he's about to drown, and his mom comes up and she picks him up, and he's like in 2 feet of water and he can stand. So we have this idea that it's this really terrible, dramatic experience, but actually it goes away very quickly when you allow yourself to heal. And that was the major turning point for me, was very simple, actually. And it's a tool set that I use with my clients now all the time, using nonviolent communication, because I was recreating experiences, of course, as an adult, of betrayal. And so I had justified that I couldn't trust anyone. And I justified that I needed to go find the facts so that I could make choices that were right for me as a sovereign person. But I was creating a reality where I wasn't living in my truth. I was demanding and interrogating others for theirs in order for me to know what was up from down, while completely ignoring how I felt. And those things came into an onset, I realized, through nonviolent communication when I felt overwhelmed, which was a physical and emotional experience for me that I was relatively disconnected from. And I knew that with overwhelm, I was going to feel vulnerable. And with vulnerable, I was going to feel distrustful, because my experience and my training, the way that I was raised, necessarily meant that vulnerability led to betrayal.
Right.
And so this was the point where I disconnected from everyone.
So how did you reconcile with that, and how'd you learn to be vulnerable again? Because in your vulnerability, lies your strength, but it can be terrifying. So how'd you work through that?
I had one relationship with my coach who, as it would happen, and this is actually, I think, really relevant. When I first met her, I was repulsed by her in the same way that I was repulsed by myself. Like I had this, the belief system has had varying layers, but, I think the root of this colonics experience was this belief, you are disgusting, which is a really intense belief system to be carrying around unconsciously. And so a lot of my experiences of people who I didn't like were actually disgust. I would experience disgust and repulse. And my coach at the time was someone who I initially was disgusted by. And I think it's because she represented and embodied everything that I thought I couldn't have.
Wow.
And I was in a workshop And she ended up being the person who was at service to me effectively during a big breakdown where I couldn't trust anyone. I was completely disoriented and paranoid because this whole thing around truth had kind of come up, and truth and betrayal. And she just was steady and held space and showed up consistently and put her attention on me. And we were together for about 7 days in that workshop. It was an intensive. So it was like, you're living there, you're sleeping there, you're kind of in it for the work. I was going through, I don't know if you're familiar with the 12 steps, but I was doing the 12 steps with, it was loosely adult children of alcoholics and other dysfunctional families. And I was going through my resentments in step 4. And I had added to that process, steps of understanding how I felt when I felt those things, those traumas, those experiences, and also the impact of the reactivity that I decided about also from those experiences. And fleshing that out with her, I realized that vulnerability was not a safe space for me. And so we explicitly worked on that in our connection. I hired her as my coach after that. That time.
And when did you feel a shift? When did you say, okay, this feels really unfamiliar, different, but this is good?
There was a day. So I would actually, one of the ways that I had defined this is sort of like the tail end of the dark night of the soul, where I actually literally had an experience where I felt like I was at the bottom of the barrel of my heart. So it was like cold, damp floor. I had found stillness in that intensive. So it was in a self-recognition of all of the places where I had been making decisions for myself out of a lack of trust, and that I had the power to choose to trust. And that is part of the reason why I work so much with belief systems, actually, is because we do have the power to make different choices. We may be victimized, but we don't have to feel like victims.
Absolutely.
And that has been, I did both work with my coach and with a counselor on this particular area of how do I choose to believe who I am about, what do I choose to believe about myself with regard to this experience? And there was a part of my ego that really wanted to be the Cinderella story, like I was successful despite my broken childhood. And that was part of my battle cry, like people respected me because they saw how far I've come.
But you know what? Whenever we see that, when someone creates this amazing, let's say, financial success, but it's because of I'll show you or whatever it is, that soil is never, it's not the right soil to birth, something healthy and beautiful. So what did it lead to? Where are you now?
So where I am now, let's see. So throughout that experience, one of the things that I saw sort of front and center over and over and over again was the importance of presence and the importance of what we all call now emotional intelligence, which is to say, feeling safe to express our emotional experience, separate from the story of it, which I think is a really important piece, because it's one thing to say, I have been betrayed. It's another thing to say, I feel vulnerable. One is about someone else and the other one's about us. And your truth is about you. And that was the thing that was sort of front and center for me in my healing. And I was like, wow, this is really potent stuff for people like me who have issues with freeze defense mechanism, where you go blank, you don't necessarily know what to do. It's not about remembering. It's not about making the right or wrong choice. It's simply about choosing to feel in that moment. And if you don't have access to the emotional sensation, you can have access to the physical sensation. And it really comes from being present. You can't heal if you're not present. And so one of the things that I started to notice is that, talk therapy and processing my trauma was getting me nowhere. But if I could, in the present moment, express how I felt, and I allowed someone else to hold space for that, and started to realize that was a need that I could ask for. I don't need you to give me advice. I don't need you to make it better. I just need you to hear me and witness me here. That process is extremely powerful. And that's the process I now offer to my clients, that and much more, obviously, to teach them that there is validity in their experience, And
you know, and what you're saying, and sorry to interrupt, you're saying it really, what I'm hearing is it's a process where you're learning to trust yourself as well.
That's right. So that's essential. And that's one of the reasons why I suggested this conversation be from betrayal to trust. Like, how do you trust after being betrayed? Is that you can't trust other people to not betray you if you don't trust yourself as an adult, you know, like, especially if it's an authority figure who has betrayed you. You will find yourself in dynamics where you either feel superior or inferior to the people around you. And that is a evidence of dysfunction already, if you feel superior or inferior. And the way to break that pattern is to really check in with how you feel. And the thing that gets complicated about this, I think, is that a lot of people who have experienced betrayal feel numbness. They feel a void. And what we've taught ourselves to do is to not feel when there's numbness. We say, okay, well, there must be nothing there. And so we might default to saying, I don't know what to do. And the reality is that numbness is a feeling. Numbness is actually evidence of a lot of feeling. And I like to use the analogy, when your foot falls asleep, you don't notice it's asleep until it's starting to wake back up again, and then it's painful. When your hand is out in the cold and you put your glove back on, it hurts. You know, your blood is thawing. Right. And it's not numb because it's absent of something. It's numb because it's full.
That's such an important distinction. I think that is absolutely going to help everybody listening, because it's true. We could be numb and think, okay, well, there's nothing going on. But in fact, there really is. It's just not ready to be birthed or unearthed just yet, but it's right there. Antesa, this is so helpful. And I know you help so many people with this conversation. Where can we learn more about you?
You can learn about me on my website, antesajensen.com. It's ANTESA, Jensen, JENSEN. And on Facebook and on Instagram. I share a lot. I'm a very generous person. I love to write content. So I have a blog that I contribute to probably, 2 or 3 times a week. I write posts around this, a lot around freeze, around, how do you presence yourself in the here and now and learn how to feel? Because there's just so, like you said that at the beginning of this call, vulnerability is power. And, you don't get strong without learning how to be tender. And that is a big piece of my work. It's a big piece of the work that I do with my clients, and it's all over the website.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Antesa, I want to thank you so much for your time, and anybody who's struggling with vulnerability, with trust, with, of course, betrayal. I know they're going to get so much out of this conversation. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I loved how Antesa walked us through her experience. We often hear about fight or flight, but freeze is a very real state when we feel there's nowhere to run and we don't have the ability to fight back. She also explained how facing her challenges led to her healing, which is something I can't stress enough. Stay in touch with Antesa by going to antesajensen.com, and we'll have all of her information in the show notes at pbtinstitute.com/podcast. Here's my biggest takeaway. While it may seem easier to avoid, numb, or distract ourselves from something painful, here's another example of face it, feel it, and heal it. We simply won't change or heal if we keep running from our pain, and it's also one of the most impactful ways to not only heal, but birth something beautiful. As you know, lots of physical, mental, and emotional symptoms are left in the wake of betrayal. So to find out what may be lingering for you, take the post-betrayal syndrome quiz at pbtinstitute.com/quiz, and let us support you. Go to Facebook and join our group, Women Hacking Betrayal, where we give information, tools, and support to help you move forward and heal once and for all. Can't wait to be with you next time. And here's to your breakthrough.